Welcome to Tank Talk. I'm your host, Bob Tankard, and this evening we have a special guest, Tom Dunlop. And Tom is the author of the CHAPPY FERRY Book. This great little book here that tells us all about the CHAPPY Ferry. Tom, welcome to Tank Talk.
Thank you very much.
I know you just came back from New York and
Yep.
you've been down there and you're here for a couple of weeks.
That's right.
Tom, tell us a little bit about who Tom is.
Right. Well, I first came here in 1961. I was 6 months old. My family was a summer family.
Okay.
My father was a boarding school teacher at the Taft School, and those were the days when a boarding school teacher could afford to come here and stay for the whole summer. And it was actually a different time. People came and spent the whole summer, even if they didn't know
I
the
moved
place.
here in 1961. I was 15.
That's right. So I was the firstborn son. My father and mother came here from Connecticut. I grew up here coming every summer. I was what the townies of Edgartown called a summer dink.
The summer dink.
A summer dink. And I was a summer kid until the mid-1970s when my parents divorced. At that point, they had bought a house in Edgartown. And my mother and my sisters and I moved here year-round. My younger sister went through the grade school in Edgartown. And I went back to one of the schools where my father had taught.
Okay.
So I became, you know, a resident of the town, but I really wasn't here.
Right, right.
My mom became an EMT. She was the first paramedic on the island.
All right.
And is now retired here.
Okay, so your mother still's here. Your sister?
My sister now my sister married a jockey. She was always interested in horses. And he was very successful. He rode in the Kentucky circuit and then in Delaware and Maryland, and they now live in Maryland, where she is a nurse.
All right.
When I left here, there was two tracks for me. One was I was either going to be a writer or I was going to be an actor.
Okay.
And acting just had a very slight edge on writing for me. But so I went to college at Brown University. I went to the acting program at Juilliard, and I acted for about 12 years. I mostly went and did shows in either off Broadway or in the, some of the great regional theaters that they have in the country.
Right.
But I was really fortunate because our house is right next door to the Vineyard Gazette office. My summer jobs were writing for the paper.
Right.
And Dick and Jody Reston, who ran the paper in those days, took me under their wing. Right. And so everything that I know about writing is really thanks to their ownership of the paper and their stewardship of me as a writer. When I stopped acting, I became the managing editor of Martha's Vineyard magazine, which the Gazette owns. And then briefly the editor. Right. And from that, when I decided I wanted to go back to writing, here came this wonderful opportunity to start writing books.
Let me ask you something about the CHAPPY Ferry, because acting and writing is not much difference in the sense that most actors eventually look into writing. I have a friend of mine that's a producer in Hollywood, and he did some acting, and then he became a producer. Right. I'd go to his house, and he'd have these stacks of shows or things that people wanted to, people wanted him to look at. Scripts and everything else. So it's, in a sense, it is that.
It's
that
storytelling.
It's a strong connection. The CHAPPY Ferry. What gave you the idea to write the book?
When I was 4 years old, my father and mother, it must have been an early June day. It was stormy, and probably I was a handful. And they went out for a walk. I remember being carried by my dad down to the Edgartown waterfront, and I'm sure I'd seen the ferry before because we'd been here, which is the first time that I zeroed in on it. They took me down to the waterfront, and as a kid who had grown up inland, suddenly now I'm getting to see the water and beginning to get aware of it. And we had come over on the big ferry, probably the Islander. And that was my sense of what a ferry was, a gigantic thing that carried trucks. And suddenly we came down this street, it was Dock Street, and I could see the gantry that holds up the ramp over the ferry house. And thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to get to see another big ferry. They didn't tell me this. And we round the corner, and out there in the harbor entrance is this box. Looks to me like it's a toy. Literally, I thought it was a toy. And There was a Jeep. I remember there's like a
Right.
Jeep Willys on it.
Right.
And there was somebody standing to the side. He was probably the helmsman, the captain.
The captain. That's where the actual.
He had a handle.
Right there, and that
Exactly.
was where that's right.
And I saw this thing coming towards me, and I thought to myself, I want that. I want that. That toy belongs to me. I want to be on it. I just was imprinted on it, like a baby duck is imprinted on the mama duck. But then there was another part of it, which was, this was a stormy day. It was a northeaster.
Right.
And the original On Time, which this was,
Right.
not the ones that are sailing today, it had a very flat front.
Right.
And when it went through the water, waves
Waves are everywhere.
busted over that thing. And the other thing that struck me about it was, it's dangerous. This is for grown-ups. And there's no reason in the world to be on this thing unless you really need it, unless
Right.
people are really depending on it.
Right, right.
And that combination of something small and toy-like and big and important, I just latched onto it. And as I grew up, I would save money so that I could ride it back and forth by myself. It was really the first kind of grown-up thing I ever got to do. And for me, you know, I'm a sailor, a day sailor, and I love to hang around the waterfront. But to me, if you had to say, for you, Tom, what is the symbol of Edgartown? It's that little operation.
Where did you go? Where did you go when you had the idea and you began to explore, you know, writing about the ferry?
Yeah.
You know, who did you go to on the Vineyard to begin to get ideas, to get photographs, to get history
For this book?
for this book?
Right. Because I loved the ferry so much, I would read everything that I could, and I would go over to the Vineyard Gazette, which has this wonderful library of old clippings. And I figured out really early on, as a young man, that no one had ever written a full story about this thing before.
This is the first time I've been on the island since 1961 when I came here to stay. I
Yep.
came in '59 as a vacationer, but
Yep.
it's 1961. I've never read any articles or anything that implicated the Chappie Ferry other than, oh, you got to take the Chappie Ferry to Chappie.
Right,
There wasn't any importance of it.
Yeah, there's never been a full history written of it. The ferry, one interesting thing about it is that although the ferry provides a public service, it has
Right.
always been, and is to this day, privately owned. Right. So along the way, there were ferry captains and owners who would talk about their own time.
Right.
And that's how you began to stitch the history together, is their own particular memories. The most famous guy in the 20th century, I'm maybe not the most famous, but I think still to Chappie residents, the best remembered and most loved was a guy named Tony Betancourt.
Tony, right.
Tony, yeah. Now he invented the modern day ferries that we know
Right,
today.
right.
He designed and built that idea. Nobody thought it was a good idea, but he persevered. And you start picking up anecdotes like that, and you connect from one story in which, for example, Tony is talking about his predecessor. So then you go to the files about that guy, and you just start literally creating kind of a chain. It's just been my good fortune that Dick and Jody Reston taught me the skills of a
Right.
journalist about where to start the story, what do you know, and then what clues, like a detective, do you pick up from those stories to work your way backward and forward?
No, Tom, they were talking, I was reading a little bit about, you know, your biography and whatnot, and you were saying that 200 years, this piece of apparatus has been in operation for 200 years, and I'm saying 200 years, and I know for 200 years there wasn't anything motorized.
Right.
And the only other way that people could have gotten to Chappie was through the beach. Now we can't do that anymore since the storm of about 4 or 5 years ago. And because I used to go to Chappie in my four-wheel drive down there, go to Waste Creek, go fishing and come back. Now we can't do that.
Right.
I'm saying to myself, how could they have possibly, it couldn't have been any vehicles, horse and buggy on Chappie, I don't know, 200 years ago. You know, how would they get them over there?
Right.